Greetings. Today I'm continuing the complaint, Casandra Ventura versus Sean Combs, Bad Boy Entertainment, Bad Boy Records, Epic Records, Comb Enterprises LLC, and Doe Corporations 1 through 10. Just a reminder, there's a trigger warning associated with all of this content. Pretty much everything associated with Sean Combs, I would assume at this point. Let's get into it. Part 5. Mr. Combs forces Ms. Ventura into sex trafficking. Within a few months of beginning a romantic relationship with 40-year-old Mr. Combs, the 22-year-old Ms. Ventura felt beholden to his whims and demands. While in New York City, Mr. Combs told Ms. Ventura that he wanted to engage in a fantasy of his called voyeurism. Mr. Combs said it would turn him on if he saw Ms. Ventura, quote, with another dick, unquote. The first time, Mr. Combs hired a man and brought the man to his home in Los Angeles. The man, Mr. Combs, and Ms. Ventura wore masquerade masks and ingested drugs. Mr. Combs directed Ms. Ventura to perform sexual acts with this man while Mr. Combs watched them. He masturbated while he directed Ms. Ventura and the man to do specific sexual acts. The entire encounter lasted multiple days. Mr. Combs began to call the arrangement, quote, freak off, unquote, or FO. He would repeatedly tell Ms. Ventura at random moments that he wanted an FO, and Ms. Ventura was eventually expected to facilitate the location and the hiring of male sex workers. At certain points during Ms. Ventura and Mr. Combs' relationship, he would insist on an FO weekly. Mr. Combs would repeatedly tell Ms. Ventura that this practice was our thing and our secret. FOs would take place in hotel suites very often, including at the Trump International at Columbus Circle, L'Hermitage Beverly Hills, the London Hotel in Los Angeles, the Intercontinental Century City, the Intercontinental Atlanta, the Intercontinental New York City, the One Hotel in New York and in Miami, and the Mandarin Oriental Hotel in New York and in Miami, and Fontainebleau in Miami, the Beverly Hills Hotel, and Shutters on the Beach in Los Angeles. On one occasion around 2013, Mr. Combs had an FO set up at the Intercontinental Hotel in New York, after which he was charged with thousands of dollars in damages by the hotel. Upon information and belief, Mr. Combs' chief of staff, Tony Fletcher, paid the invoice charged by the hotel. Ms. Ventura was eventually instructed to use websites and escort services to find male sex workers to participate the FOs. Mr. Combs told Ms. Ventura to search for, quote, large black penises, unquote, on the website. Sometimes Mr. Combs would pay to fly male sex workers to his location, including to multiple cities in the United States as well as abroad. He required Ms. Ventura and his staff to help make these arrangements. Mr. Combs' assistants would set up the FOs, including by setting up the hotel suites with baby oil and Astroglide. Mr. Combs always supplied Ms. Ventura and the sex worker with copious amounts of drugs before and during the FOs. Ms. Ventura was given ecstasy, cocaine, GHB, ketamine, marijuana, and alcohol in excessive amounts during FOs, which allowed her to disassociate during these horrific encounters. It became commonplace to get IV fluids in the days after an FO to recover from the excessive substances he pushed upon her. Ms. Ventura was required to dress up in lingerie for an FO, and Mr. Combs insisted she wear white nail polish to contrast her nails with the skin of the black men he hired to have sex with her. During the FO, Mr. Combs would instruct Ms. Ventura to pour excessive amounts of oil over herself. Mr. Combs would then instruct Ms. Ventura and the sex workers to speak to each other and would specifically tell Ms. Ventura where to touch the sex workers. Mr. Combs would say things like, quote, grab that big black dick, unquote, and ask her, how does it feel, as he directed her to perform for him. During the FOs, in addition to directing Ms. Ventura and masturbating, Mr. Combs would use his laptop, phone, and tablet to record Ms. Ventura having sex with the hired sex worker. He treated the force encounter as a personal art project, adjusting the candles he used for lighting to frame the videos he took. While Ms. Ventura quickly deleted any photographs or video of sex acts if they were taken on her phone, Mr. Combs would repeatedly make clear that he retained any videos of her during FOs. Even when she deleted the videos, Mr. Combs would tell Ms. Ventura that he was able to recover deleted videos from her devices. On one occasion, he sat next to her on a flight and made her watch a video she thought she had deleted, reinforcing the inability to escape and the immense power he held over her. Mr. Combs would pay the male sex worker a few $1,000s in cash for their services. During some FOs, Mr. Combs would become extremely intoxicated and would hit Ms. Ventura in front of the male sex workers. Ms. Ventura was repulsed by Mr. Combs' demands, but between the physical beating and recognizing his incredible power and incredible temper, Ms. Ventura became petrified of her partner and boss and felt that she could say no. He would even present her with lavish gifts prior to or in the middle of FOs, seemingly acknowledging ways in which these forced encounters would constitute work for Ms. Ventura that he needed to compensate her for this work. At one point, he had given her so many designer bracelets for FOs and immediately following his brutal beatings that she felt she was shackled by his presence. Frequently, her anxiety before an FO would become so great she would become physically ill, sometimes to the point of vomiting. While kneeling over the toilet, Mr. Combs would shame her into performing for him, eventually forcing her to get up and proceed with the encounter. She knew firsthand that telling Mr. Combs that she did not want to engage in FOs and was met with anger and violence. In addition, any suggestion that Ms. Ventura would refuse the FOs or otherwise report Mr. Combs' abuse was met with ultimatums by Mr. Combs, who would say that she could not go to the police because she had a lot to lose. Around August 2015, for example, in the middle of a surprise birthday party dinner for her 29th birthday, Mr. Combs insisted that Ms. Ventura leave the party and go to a hotel for an FO. When she expressed that he did not want to go, he had Ms. Ventura cornered by his security staff in order to force her to leave with him. After this FO, Mr. Combs and Ms. Ventura went back to the hotel that Ms. Ventura was staying in, where some of her friends were already hanging out. Mr. Combs was extremely intoxicated, and at one point during the night, picked up some of Ms. Ventura's friends like a child and dangled the friend over a balcony of the 17th floor hotel suite. Ms. Ventura and her friends were scared by Mr. Combs' erratic behavior, but Ms. Ventura was heavily sedated because of the drugs she took to participate in the FO and was therefore unable to respond to his terrifying behavior. The FOs became work for Ms. Ventura, and despite her protestations, Mr. Combs insisted on these intricately staged and forced sexual encounters between Ms. Ventura and various male sex workers. Part 6. Ms. Ventura tries to escape Mr. Combs' abuse. At any time, she tried to create distance between her and Mr. Combs. He used his networks to find her and convince her to return to his abuse. On multiple occasions, Mr. Combs sent his employees to lure Ms. Ventura back. In 2011, during a rough patch in Mr. Combs and Ms. Ventura's relationship, she had a brief relationship with musician Kid Cudi. When Mr. Combs returned from a trip, he demanded another FO of Ms. Ventura. She acquiesced. During this FO, Mr. Combs found Ms. Ventura's phone and found emails between her and Kid Cudi. Mr. Combs became enraged and proceeded to place a manual corkscrew between his fingers and lunged at Ms. Ventura. Ms. Ventura ran away to stay at Kid Cudi's home to escape Mr. Combs' wrath. Soon thereafter, one of Mr. Combs' staff told her that she needed to just talk to Mr. Combs, even though he was enraged. Feeling like she could not escape him and his network of enforcers, Ms. Ventura returned to Mr. Combs. He hit her several times and then kicked her in the back as she tried to run out the door. She went to her parents' home in Connecticut, where her mother took pictures of the bruises Mr. Combs had left on Ms. Ventura's body. In February of 2012, during Paris Fashion Week, Mr. Combs told Ms. Ventura that he was going to blow up Kid Cudi's car and that he wanted to ensure that Kid Cudi was home with his friends when it happened. Around that time, Kid Cudi's car exploded in his driveway. Ms. Ventura was terrified as she began to fully comprehend what Mr. Combs was both willing and able to do to those he believed had slighted him. In 2015, Ms. Ventura spoke to a popular music manager at an after-party in a hotel suite in Las Vegas. Mr. Combs saw her speaking to this manager and sternly told her to step into the bedroom adjoining the suite. In the bedroom, Mr. Combs beat Ms. Ventura severely. She ran from corner to corner of the room, trying to avoid him and his beatings and kicking. When she tried to lock herself in the bathroom, he pushed through and punched and kicked her while she curled up under the toilet. Her screams were drowned out by loud music playing in the outside area of the hotel suite. When Mr. Combs, as head of security, saw and assisted Ms. Ventura after the assault, they began to cry. Ms. Ventura had 2 black eyes, a burst and bruised lip, and a huge welt on her forehead. Upon seeing the results of his vicious attack, Mr. Combs immediately took steps to conceal his wrongdoing. He forced Ms. Ventura to stay at his home in Holmby Hills, along with his sons. While there, Mr. Combs FaceTimed Ms. Ventura and stated, quote, You gotta go up and put more makeup on. My son can't see you like that," unquote. She did put makeup on, per Mr. Combs' demands. Ms. Ventura felt that she had no choice but to obey her abuser. Even though security guards, assistants, and friends saw the situation she was in, no one dared to help her or speak up on her behalf. She therefore had no choice but to remain subservient. Later in 2015, while shooting a movie in Cape Town, South Africa, Ms. Ventura began a flirtatious relationship with an actor. She spent New Year's Eve with this actor, but Mr. Combs soon found out. Mr. Combs called the actor and threatened him. The actor proceeded to call Ms. Ventura and tell her, "You really need to call Mr. Combs." In or around 2016, during an FO at the Intercontinental Hotel in Century City, Los Angeles, Mr. Combs became extremely intoxicated and punched Ms. Ventura in the face, giving her a black eye. After he fell asleep, Ms. Ventura tried to leave the hotel suite. But as he exited, Mr. Combs awoke and began screaming at her. He followed her into the hallway of the hotel while yelling at her. He grabbed at her, then took a glass vase in the hallway and threw them at her, causing glass to crash all around them as she ran to the elevator to escape. She managed to get into the elevator, and when she got to the lobby, quickly took a cab to her apartment. Upon realizing that her running away would cause Mr. Combs to be even more angrier with her, and completely stuck in this vicious cycle of abuse, Ms. Ventura returned to the hotel with the intention of apologizing for running away from her abuser. When she returned, hotel security staff urged her to get back into the cab and go to her apartment, suggesting that they had seen the security footage showing Mr. Combs beating Ms. Ventura and throwing glass at her in the hotel hallway. Upon information and belief, Mr. Combs paid the Intercontinental Century City $50,000 for the hallway security footage from that evening. After this, Ms. Ventura left her home in Comstock and went to a hideaway at a friend's home in Florida. James Cruz, president of Bad Boy Management, tracked Ms. Ventura down and told her that her single would not be released if she did not answer Mr. Combs' phone calls. A woman who worked with Sony Music reached out to her with a similar ultimatum concerning her record. Incredibly, Mr. Combs even convinced one of his attorneys to call Ms. Ventura at this time. The lawyer told Ms. Ventura that it is in your best interest to call Mr. Combs back. Each time Ms. Ventura tried to run away, Mr. Combs and his powerful network would force her back to him. Mr. Combs' tight hold over her life had irreparably damaged her friendships. Around 2018, when Ms. Ventura was with her friend Carrie Morgan in her house, Mr. Combs used his key to Ms. Ventura's house and came in unannounced. He and Ms. Morgan had an altercation, during which Mr. Combs threw a hanger at Ms. Morgan. Upon information and belief, the incident resulted in a settlement between Mr. Combs and Ms. Morgan, and Ms. Ventura ended up paying Ms. Morgan additional funds in an attempt to resolve the dispute between her best friend, her close friend, and her abusive and controlling boyfriend. The relationship between Ms. Ventura and Ms. Morgan had been strained since this time. Seeing the extreme measures Mr. Combs took to keep a tight hold on Ms. Ventura and isolate her from her support network, and having experienced the repercussions of rejecting his demands, Ms. Ventura felt like saying no to Mr. Combs would cost her something: her family, her friends, her career, or even her life. Part 7. Mr. Combs rapes Ms. Ventura. By 2017 and 2018, Ms. Ventura became desperate to leave Mr. Combs and his abuse of her. She recognized that if she stayed with him, she would never be able to have a successful career or ever be physically and mentally safe. She therefore became determined to completely break away from Mr. Combs and his cycle of abuse, and made concerted efforts to avoid him. In December 2018, she joined Mr. Combs for a dinner at an Italian restaurant in Malibu, California, for what she believed would be a discussion about concluding their relationship for good. After dinner, Mr. Combs and Ms. Ventura returned to her home, which was paid for by Mr. Combs. Mr. Combs forced himself into her apartment and tried to kiss Ms. Ventura. She told him to stop and attempted to push him away. Mr. Combs then forcibly pulled off Ms. Ventura's clothing and unbuckled his belt. He proceeded to rape Ms. Ventura while she repeatedly said no and tried to push him away. Soon thereafter, Ms. Ventura took steps to completely separate herself from her longtime abuser, including by leaving the home that he paid for and returning the car he'd purchased for her. Despite moving away, Ms. Ventura's address was posted online in early 2019, leading to fears for her safety. Ms. Ventura, who was under immense duress during the months after Mr. Combs raped her, took all steps possible to entirely remove herself from her abuser's ambit, including by entering into contracts to end her record deal with Bad Boy Entertainment. Section 8. Mr. Combs' sexual and physical abuse of Ms. Ventura has caused her lifelong harm. As a result of the immense trauma Ms. Ventura endured for over a decade with Mr. Combs, she has suffered and continues to suffer from immense emotional distress. Following her escape from the cycle of abuse and sex trafficking she endured, she struggled with the physical and mental manifestations of her trauma. The birth of her 2 children, however, allowed her a new lease on life and gave her purpose. She credits her children with saving her from the trauma that had consumed her for over a decade of her life. Except for the months when she was pregnant with her children, Ms. Ventura struggled with her addictions to drugs and alcohol, addictions that were established and fueled by Mr. Combs. She turned to substances to drown out the memories of her abuse. Without being intoxicated, she suffered from horrific nightmares of the forced sexual acts that Mr. Combs demanded she participate in during the regularly scheduled FOs, and of the physical beatings that she endured throughout their relationship. She had difficulty eating or sleeping, and her relationships with her family suffered. During this time, she frequently had thoughts of ending her life. To rebuild her life and her career, Ms. Ventura needed to completely reinvent herself. She checked herself into an inpatient treatment at a rehabilitation center, where she first confronted the extent of the trauma she lives with. She has required intensive therapy and other medical care to cover from Mr. Combs' abuse, and she will forever live with the physical and psychological repercussions of over a decade of violence, fear, and exploitation that she endured. Although Ms. Ventura was unable to speak up against the years of abuse she endured at the hands of Mr. Combs, she has since been able to rebuild her life and confront her trauma. And thanks to the passage of New York Adult Survivors Act and the California's Sexual Abuse Accountability and Cover-Up Act, she is now ready and able to also confront her abuser and to hold him and those who enabled his abuse accountable for their actions. We're now to the first cause of action. Sex trafficking under Sex trafficking under 18 U.S. Code 1591. Plaintiff repeats and realleges each and every allegation in all of the preceding paragraphs, as if fully set forth herein. Plaintiff is a victim of sex trafficking within the meaning of the code and is therefore entitled to bring up a civil action. The defendant's acts and omissions, taken separately and or together, as outlined above, constitutes a violation of U.S. codes. Specifically, defendant Sean Combs perpetrated sex trafficking of Ms. Ventura by requiring her to engage in forced sexual acts in multiple jurisdictions, and all defendants benefited from Mr. Combs' venture by holding Ms. Ventura, an artist with Bad Boy Records, and otherwise employed by other defendants' doe corporations, captive to Mr. Combs' demands and desires. At all relevant times, defendants participated in and facilitated the harboring and transportation of plaintiff for purposes of sex by induced by force, fraud, or coercion. The defendant's corporations have financially and otherwise benefited as a result of these acts and omissions by keeping Mr. Combs, the volatile and explosive owner of the defendant corporations, satisfied. They benefited from facilitating his behavior to the extent it kept the mercurial music mogul happy and kept Ms. Ventura obedient to Mr. Combs and the corporation's interests. Defendant Combs and defendant Bad Boy Records, Bad Boy Entertainment, and Doe Corporations 1 through 10 formed a venture as defined, given that they constituted a group of, quote, a group of two or more individuals associated in fact, whether or not a legal entity, unquote. As a direct and proximate cause of defendant's unlawful conduct, as alleged here and above, plaintiff has suffered physical injury, severe emotional distress, and anxiety, humiliation, embarrassment, post-traumatic stress disorder, economic harm, and other consequential damages. Plaintiff also seeks reasonable attorney's fees. Section cause of action is violation of the New York Services for Victims of Human Trafficking, and plaintiff alleges and repeats each and every allegation in all of the preceding paragraphs as if fully set forth herein. Plaintiff is a victim of sex trafficking and is therefore entitled to bring a civil action. The defendant's acts and omissions, taken separately and or together as outlined above, constitute a violation of New York Code. Specifically, defendant Sean Combs perpetrated sex trafficking of Ms. Ventura by requiring her to engage in forced sexual acts in the state of New York, and all defendants benefited from Mr. Combs' venture by holding Ms. Ventura, an artist signed with defendant Bad Boy Records and otherwise employed by Doe Corporations, captive to Mr. Combs' demands and desires. At all relevant times, defendant participated in and facilitated the harboring and transportation of plaintiff for purposes of sex induced by force, fraud, or coercion. The defendant corporations have financially and otherwise benefited as a result of these acts and omissions by keeping Mr. Combs, the volatile and explosive owner of the defendant corporations, satisfied. They benefited him from facilitating his behavior to the extent it kept the mercurial music mogul happy and kept Ms. Ventura obedient to Mr. Combs and the corporation's interests. As a direct and proximate cause of defendant's unlawful conduct as alleged herein above, plaintiff has suffered physical injury, severe emotional distress and anxiety, humiliation, embarrassment, post-traumatic stress disorder, economic harm, and other consequential damages. Plaintiff also seeks reasonable attorney's fees as provided under the New York Social Service 483-BB. Third cause of action, violation of the California Trafficking Victims Protection Act. Plaintiff repeats and realleges each and every allegation in all of the preceding paragraphs, as if fully set forth herein. Plaintiff is a victim of sex trafficking and is therefore entitled to bring a civil action under California Civil Code 52.5. The defendant's acts and omissions, taken separately and or together, as outlined above, constitute a violation. Specifically, defendant Sean Combs perpetrated sex trafficking of Ms. Ventura by requiring her to engage in forced sexual acts in the state of California, and all defendants benefited from Mr. Combs' venture by holding Ms. Ventura, an artist signed with defendant Bad Boy Records and otherwise employed by defendant Doe Corporations, captive to Mr. Combs' demands and desires. At all relevant times, defendants participated in and facilitated the harboring and transportation of plaintiff for purposes of sex induced by force, fraud, or coercion. The defendant corporations have financially and otherwise benefited as a result of these acts and omissions by keeping Mr. Combs, the volatile and explosive owner of defendant corporations, satisfied. They benefited from facilitating his behavior to the extent it kept the mercurial music mogul happy and kept Ms. Ventura obedient to Mr. Combs and the corporation's interests. As a direct and proximate cause of defendant's unlawful conduct as alleged herein above, plaintiff has suffered physical injury, severe emotional distress and anxiety, humiliation, embarrassment, post-traumatic stress disorder, economic harm, and other consequential damages. Plaintiff also seeks reasonable attorney's fees as provided under California Civil Code. Fourth cause of action, battery and sexual battery under New York law. And this is specifically against defendant Sean Combs versus all corporations. Plaintiff repeats and realleges each and every allegation in all of the preceding paragraphs as if fully set forth herein. In performing the conduct described above, defendant committed a battery against plaintiff because he intentionally engaged in unlawful, intentional, and offensive touching or application of force to plaintiff's persons. Defendant's actions amount to violations in New York and in California. As a result of Mr. Combs' alleged conduct, plaintiff has suffered physical injury, severe emotional distress, humiliation, embarrassment, anxiety, economic harm, and other consequential damages. The conduct of Mr. Combs described above was willful, wanton, and malicious. At all relevant times, he acted within conscious disregard of plaintiff's rights and feelings, acted with the knowledge of or with reckless disregard for the fact that his conduct was certain to cause injury and or humiliation to plaintiff, and intended to cause physical injury and or pain and suffering to the plaintiff. By virtue of the foregoing, plaintiff is entitled to recover punitive and exemplary damages from Mr. Combs according to proof at trial. This act is timely and is brought during the 1-year time period set forth. The claims brought herein allege intentional and negligent acts or omissions for physical, psychological, and other injury suffered as a result of conduct that would constitute sexual offenses. The action also falls within California's sexual abuse law, and it's brought during the 3-year time period set forth in that action. Fifth cause of action, sexual assault pursuant to the California Sex Abuse Cover-Up and Accountability Act against all defendants. Plaintiff repeats and realleges each and every allegation in all of the preceding paragraphs, as if fully set forth herein. Defendant Mr. Combs subjected plaintiff to sexual abuse, sexual battery, rape, and forcible acts of sexual penetration. In doing so, he intended to and did cause harmful and sexually offensive contact with their person and place them in imminent apprehension of such contact. Defendant corporations were entities engaged in a cover-up because defendant corporations took concerted efforts to hide evidence relating to the above described sexual assaults that incentivized individuals to remain silent or prevented information relating to the sexual assaults from becoming public. As a direct and proximate result of defendant's unlawful conduct as alleged here and above, plaintiff has suffered physical injury, severe emotional distress and anxiety, humiliation, embarrassment, post-traumatic stress disorder, economic harm, and other consequential damages. Sixth cause of action, violation of Victims of Gender-Motivated Violence Act against all defendants, New York City, Admin Code. Plaintiff repeats and realleges each and every allegation in all of the preceding paragraphs as if fully set forth herein. The above described conduct of the defendant, including but not limited to Mr. Combs' repeated and physical and sexual assaults of plaintiffs in New York City, constitutes a crime of violence and a crime of violence motivated by gender. The above described conduct of defendant Mr. Combs, including but not limited to his repeated physical and sexual assaults of plaintiff in New York City, constitutes a crime of violence against plaintiff and is crime of violence motivated by gender. They define it further to mean the term crime of violence means an act or series of acts that would constitute a misdemeanor or felony against the person as described in state or federal law or that would constitute a misdemeanor or felony against property as defined in state or federal law if the conduct presents a serious risk of physical injury to another, whether or not those acts have actually resulted in criminal charges, prosecution, or conviction. And the term crime of violence motivated by gender means a crime of violence committed because of gender or on the basis of gender and due, at least in part, to an animus based on the victim's gender. Defendant corporations enabled Mr. Combs' commission of the crime of violence motivated by gender and are therefore also liable. As a direct and proximate result of the aforementioned crimes of violence and gender-motivated violence, plaintiff has sustained and will continue to sustain monetary damages, physical injury, pain and suffering, and serious psychological and emotional distress, entitling her to an award of compensatory and punitive damages, injunctive and declaratory relief, attorney's fees and costs, and other remedies as this court may deem appropriate damages. The above described conduct of defendant Mr. Combs constitutes a sexual offense, and this cause of action is timely because it is commenced within 2 years and 6 months after September 1st, 2022. Seventh cause of action: sexual harassment, gender discrimination, and hostile work environment under New York State human rights law against all defendants. Plaintiff repeats and realleges each and every allegation in all of the preceding paragraphs as if fully set forth herein. Defendants discriminated against plaintiff on basis of her gender in violation by subjecting plaintiff to disparate treatment based on her gender, including but not limited to subjecting her to sexual assault and or harassment, rape, and a hostile work environment. As a direct and proximate result of defendant's unlawful discriminatory conduct, plaintiff has suffered and continues to suffer monetary and or economic harm for which she is entitled to an award of monetary damages and other relief. As a direct and proximate result of defendant's unlawful discriminatory conduct, plaintiff has suffered and continues to suffer severe mental anguish and emotional distress for which she is entitled to an award of monetary damages and other relief. Defendant's unlawful and discriminatory actions were intentional, done with malice, and or showed a deliberate, willful, wanton, and reckless indifference to plaintiff rights for which plaintiff is entitled to an award of punitive damages. This action is timely and is brought during the 1-year time period set forth. The claims brought herein allege intentional and negligent acts or omissions for physical, psychological, and other injuries suffered as a result of conduct that would constitute sexual offenses, and such acts or omissions were committed against Ms. Ventura when she was over 18. Eighth cause of action: sexual harassment, gender discrimination, and hostile work environment under New York City human rights law against all defendants. Plaintiff repeats and realleges each and every allegation in all of the preceding paragraphs as if fully set forth herein. Defendants have discriminated against plaintiff on the basis of her gender in violation by subjecting plaintiff to disparate treatment based upon her gender, including but not limited to subjecting her to sexual assault and or harassment, rape, and other hostile work environment. As a direct and proximate result of defendant's unlawful discriminatory conduct, plaintiff has suffered and continues to suffer monetary and or economic harm for which she is entitled to an award of monetary damages and other relief. As a direct and proximate result of defendant's unlawful discriminatory conduct, plaintiff has suffered and continues to suffer severe mental anguish and emotional distress for which she is entitled to an award of monetary damages and other relief. Defendant's unlawful and discriminatory actions were intentional, done with malice, and or showed a deliberate, willful, wanton, and reckless indifference to plaintiff's rights for which plaintiff is entitled to an award of punitive damages. This action is timely because it falls within CPLR 214-J and is brought during the 1-year time period set forth in that action. The claims brought herein allege intentional and negligent acts and/or omissions for physical, psychological, and other injury suffered as a result of conduct that would constitute sexual offenses, as defined in New York Code penal law. And such acts or omissions were committed against Ms. Ventura when she was over 18. Prayer for relief. Wherefore, plaintiff prays judgment will be entered in her favor against defendants, and each of them, as follows. 1. For a monetary judgment representing compensatory damages, including consequential damages, lost wages, earnings, and all other sums of money, together with interest on these amounts, according to proof. 2. For money judgment for mental pain and anguish and severe emotional distress, according to proof. 3. For punitive and exemplary damages, according to proof. 4. For attorney's fees and costs. 5. For prejudgment and post-judgment interests. And 6. For such other and further relief as the court may deem just and proper. Dated November 16th, 2023, New York, New York. And that is the complaint against Mr. Combs by Ms. Casandra Ventura. And that was heavy. Thank you for following along. Please like and subscribe. I will continue to get these out in a timely manner, hopefully, but thank you so much for listening. I really appreciate it. This is very important. Thank you.